number one source, Sports Card Nation. The hobby is the people. Sports Card Nation.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 299 of Sports Card Nation. That's crazy, even me saying it, when you think this is a once a week show when we're on episode 299. As we approach year 6 of this show, which is I still scratch my head over that. But here we are, and still going strong, still doing very well, thanks to you out there. I know I say it all the time, but I'll say it again. There is no show without you folks out there, and I appreciate it, and not a day goes by that I don't realize that. So thank you. I got a great guest, another gentleman I should have had on. I know I say it all the time, sooner, but glad to have him on, and that's Mr. Craig Miller. You might know him better as Midlife Cards on YouTube, and he puts on a great show on his YouTube, speaks from his heart, calls it like he sees it, whether you agree or disagree, although I find myself agreeing more than disagreeing. And great content, very interactive, probably one of the most interactive shows out there. So really appreciate that about him, and we're gonna chop up a lot of hobby topics, a lot of ground we cover. I got to meet him in person recently at the National in Cleveland, which was cool. Got to talk to him there and said, hey, let's get you on an episode, and here we are today. So enough of me blabbing. Let's take a quick 30-second break, and then we'll be back with Craig Miller.
Hobby Hotline is the hobby's only live interactive call-in show. Join some of your favorite hobby personalities every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, to discuss the hottest hobby topics. If you miss us live, catch us after the fact on all major podcast platforms. Follow us on socials at Hobby Hotline.
All right, real excited to have the next gentleman on the Sports Card Shop guest line. I met him for the first time at the National in Cleveland, but I've seen his stuff and have watched his show prior to that. But that, as far as meeting in person, that was the first time. And a mutual admirer of both of our content said, John, why hasn't Greg been on your show? And so I'm ending that drought today, and welcome Greg Miller from Midlife Sports Cards.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I've watched many of your different channels for a while, and I'm excited to come on and get to talk some more after we got to have that first chat in Cleveland.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's my bad for it taking this long and whatnot. I'm getting older, and I walk into a room to do something, Greg, and then I forget, why did I come in here? So that's where I'm at. So that, I don't know if that's much of a defense, but there you go. But you've done YouTube about a year. Your channel has just been tremendous in terms of content and growth, and we're gonna definitely talk about that. But it's the old standby starting first time on the show question, kind of your entrance into the hobby many years ago, and kind of how it's come full circle and where you are today.
Yeah. So, when I was a kid, every Friday I would get $1 allowance from my dad, and we would, on the way home from school, he'd pick us up on Fridays, my brother and myself, and we would head home. And on the way, we'd stop at 7-Eleven, and usually we'd spend our $1 for the week at 7-Eleven. And this was about 1986, 1987. And so what started happening is I started buying Garbage Pail Kids and then 87 Topps cards packs. And at the time, they were a quarter, so I'd buy 4 of them. And then I'd go home and I started collecting them. That's really where the cards started. And then my brother needed a new bike. And so we were garage sailing one Saturday looking for a bike for my brother. And next thing you know, I found this house, and they had a binder for sports cards, and it had pages in it, and it had a few 86 Tops cards in it, nothing special. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's a place to put my cards. And at that point, I kind of could formally collect. And so I started to put my cards when I'd get my packs into the binder and the pages. And then fast forward to about 1988, when card shops started popping up all over. And I was driving, running an errand with my mom. We looked over and I saw this thing. It said Cards and Cards was the name of the card shop. And it said sports cards. And I begged her to go in. We went in, and I made many, many bicycle trips down to Cards and Cards for the next few years. And then eventually, so it's really my brother and I. And then eventually what happened is we got my dad into cards because we were going to card shows. We started getting in the backs of Beckett's. It would say, you know, all the different shows for the month, and we would know the locations. That was our only source of information for him. So we'd go to them, and my dad would bring us. And eventually he was like, I mean, I remember seeing him. I remember the moment I was walking across the card show down an aisle. It was a big card show in San Francisco, several hundred tables. And he's walking toward me with this big smile on his face. And he had put together over that day the 1960 Tops Yankee team set, including the mantle. And I was like, why 1960? He goes, that's one of the sets I collected as a kid. And so he was hooked. And then the journey really took off, because now it was not just him driving my brother and me. It was the three of us kind of started the journey together. And then, you know, I continued to dabble. We continued to go to the big shows. San Francisco used to have a massive show Labor Day weekend every year. There's a fashion district, some huge buildings there. The National actually was there one year. We actually attended that. Moscone Center, downtown San Francisco. And we just kind of West Coast went everywhere. And then when I got into college, I still was collecting, but I had so many things going on. So I started getting more into ticket stubs, and I started getting into golf cards. So I was doing a lot of 81, 82 golf card sets, and I was collecting a lot of Olympic ticket stubs. And then, you know, I continued to check eBay along the way. You know, I would always check what the Ernie Banks rookie card was going for, what the Yogi Berra rookie card was going for. But I wasn't buying because, you know, we had a single income. I was working. We had two daughters. And so I wasn't really buying. And then over the last few years, you know, as my wife started working again and money got a little bit freer and my kids got older, I'm like, I need to get a hobby back, and I need to really get into something. And so the age of my kids and myself and our income, it all kind of worked. And here I am.
That's awesome. And I love the family bonds, right? Like with your brother, your dad, rekindling it for him. Like he said, he collected as a kid, and here he is. He's back. And like you said, you knew just by looking at him, he had that, like the cat swallowed. I'll call it the cat swallowed the canary kind of grin. And
yeah,
you know, I love those stories because I think for especially people around our age, Craig, and maybe a little bit younger or definitely older, there was always someone else that kind of got us the itch or the bug, right? For me, it was my grandfather and my dad. And then my dad stopped, and a similar story to you, when I started really getting heavy into it again, he started picking up some stuff again. And you know, because all his stuff, like the story goes, bike spokes and throwing them against the wall and trading them. So he picked up some. He's, you know, we're from Brooklyn, so he went the Brooklyn Dodgers route, and but it's always those common threads, right? Those family threads that you know, whether it's nostalgia or sentimental. I just love hearing that because for a lot of us it rings close to home. Maybe not as much in current times, but I'm sure it still does too. Even no matter what era you're in, though, there's those similar stories as well. I saw an episode where you had your dad on, and you were looking through, a binder, and he was talking about, some of the backstory behind the cards, and then finding that card again. Not the actual. Well, in one case, it was the actual card in the
Yeah.
card store. Just you can't put a price on stuff like that. Like you've had a lot of guests on your show, as I have, but it's those kind of moments, right? You can't. That's not scripted. You can't make that stuff up.
Yeah.
That's true reality hobby TV, if you will. And even watching that and like just relating to it myself with my dad and that sort of thing. I mean, that's
Well,
it's got to be cool for you, what doing an episode like that.
it absolutely is. And, I was actually, believe it or not, I was listening to a Howard Stern episode several years ago. And Howard Stern was talking about how he hired a full, like, camera crew and producer and stuff to come and film him talking with his parents, because he knew that his parents, none of us are going to last forever. And he wanted to capture that conversation with his parents about different stories and their backgrounds, and and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have my dad on a few times, and I'll keep having him on. But it's because I get to capture it, and I have that now forever. It's a time capsule, and it's there, and I can always go back and watch it. And he came with me to the National in Cleveland. He was there. He made some big purchases. A lot of my circle of buddies know him, and we're excited to meet him as well. And so it was a very memorable event to be able to go to Cleveland with him. And he said to me just the other day, he goes, "Yeah, I mean, next year in Chicago, we'll have to make sure we do this." And I was like, "Oh, I guess we're going to Chicago together again." So he definitely has the itch, and he's got a really nice collection. So it's something fun for us to share for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. I love hearing that. And speaking of, we'll segue into talking about Cleveland and the National. So they're going to be in Chicago the next 3 years. Mm-hmm. So your dad could say Chicago, Chicago, Chicago.
Yeah.
Kind of your thoughts. You don't have to necessarily deep dive it, but now that it's in the books and wrapped up, your thoughts, Cleveland overall. I've heard other people say, Greg, that they feel Cleveland's outgrown it. I know traffic was an issue. I didn't feel like indoors in the building itself, it wasn't like we were packed in there like sardines. So I don't. It might be the traffic issue, but I mean Cleveland's a great sports town. I don't have a rich history of championships, but it's still a great sports town. I'd like to, I'm a little biased too because I can drive to Cleveland, but I hope it gets back there again. But kind of now that it's in the books, your assessment of the National in Cleveland.
Well, I think that they did a good job. I mean, it's a big facility. It's obviously not the biggest in the country, but it's a very big facility. And I felt like it was fairly organized. Were there long lines when I got my badge the first day? Of course. Was there long lines getting out the first night, especially? Yes. But, it's just like when I, drive to San Francisco and go to a Giants game, or Santa Clara and go to a 49er game. It's just kind of part of the deal. I felt like there weren't a lot of like hiccups. It wasn't people talking about, oh, I ordered my tickets and I didn't get them, or they didn't open on time, or, the complaints that we had were kind of minor. I mean, when we have tens of thousands of people in the same location, of course, the Wi-Fi and the internet's not going to be that good, especially when it's indoors in a big old building like that. Like, that's just part of it. My main issue, or my main feeling, is that the National, really, the number one thing is the accessibility for people. And it's really easy to fly into a town like Chicago. Chicago's got a big airport. It's a hub. It's easy to fly there from anywhere. the hotels are across the street. So, there were times where I know people were a little concerned going in and out of the area with as much cash as they had on them or the cards that they had on them because, you're not right at your hotel, which provides some sense of security. But Chicago, you don't have that concern. Cleveland's a little bit more spread out. The hotels aren't all right there. So you kind of had to drive in, which is part of the reason for all the car traffic. So I thought that the show was great. I thought that the layout where they put the corporate booths kind of together in this section and the autographs in this section, and there was really the main thoroughfare for the cards, and I had a great time. I mean, and I know people were upset because they didn't have the aisles where you could just walk this aisle and then walk this way back. They kind of had it in squares, but that maximizes the surface area of the space, and it also provides a way for you getting lost isn't good necessarily for you, but it kind of is for the dealers because it forces you through areas you maybe wouldn't have. So overall, honestly, I thought it was great, and I know there were complaints, and sure there are things I could complain about, but I had a great time. That said, I am looking forward to Chicago because it's a little closer for me. I can fly from Sacramento to Chicago instead of having to go to San Francisco to get a direct flight. I know it needs to be kind of at least Midwest to East Coast because that's where the majority of the dealers are located. If you do it in Las Vegas, if you do it in LA, there are a lot of people who aren't going to come because they have to go across the country. It's the same reason I don't really feel like it should be in Atlanta. It's like Atlanta's on a coast. It's a long route for a lot of people. It's not near the dealers. They might have the infrastructure to do it, but I don't think that that's the way to make it accessible. And I think, Denver would be a decent option, but I think Chicago is just kind of like, it makes the most sense. It's great for a lot of reasons. And people talk about, it's not, nobody's big enough now, or everything is going to be outgrown. And I think there are ways around that. You could make it instead of 5 days or something, you could make it, 8 or 9, you could do 7 or 8. There are some things that they could do to expand that part of it. But honestly, I thought it was great. And, I'll be back at the Cleveland airport in April to go to Strongsville. So they haven't seen the last of me for a while.
There you go. I agree for the most part, almost across the board. And you know how this goes, Greg. Some people are just going to complain. They're going to find something. You could pull off the perfect game national, right? And they're going to find one thing to nitpick over.
Time for a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Hobby News Daily is your homepage of the hobby, providing original writing, exclusive gem rate data, a daily morning minute podcast, and some of the best content creators in the hobby. Remember, hobbynewsdaily.com and at Hobby News Daily on social. Happy collecting!
We are back.
The one thing I won't give the National a pass on is the Wi-Fi, because you kind of know. I've been to other large events that are of similar ilk, and the Wi-Fi wasn't an issue. You know how many dealers are setting up. You know how many breakers are setting up. You have an approximate number of how many people are going to be walking through the doors. It's not an exact science, but you got to sort of, and you have a year, well, not a whole year, but you have, let's say 9-10 months to sort of prepare for that. So I won't give them a pass on the Wi-Fi. The traffic, you're held hostage by the city situation. It was an issue with hotels not being real close to Cleveland. That's because the building's in sort of a industrial center. That building was built during the war days when that was kind of a bomb shelter.
They built tanks in that building.
Yeah.
It's a tank manufacturing plant.
It's a product of the environment. I'd like to see. Maybe they can put some hotels around. There's land there. They can maybe put some development, some hotels in there in the future. But like you, I thought it went pretty smooth. You got a new leadership group. Is their first four. They're not new to shows, but this was their first national. So I'm giving them a little bit. I don't want to say a pass, but I'm giving them a little bit of a grading curve. Some education speak there. So I don't have too many complaints at all. I'll just hammer them on the Wi-Fi a little bit more
Sure.
than you did. The food trucks were great. I'm not a lunch eater when I go to Nashville. I've talked about I just do like granola bars and beef jerky and water, and then I make up for that at dinner time. So it's all smelled good. Like I was almost tempted to break my rule. I thought that was a nice touch because for dealers who have to eat there every day, it had different choices. It didn't have to be pizza every day. They could have pizza. I saw gyros. I saw tacos. So there was the menu was kind of eclectic, which was good for people who were eating on site. First time I've ever heard. Go ahead.
I personally, I never even planned on eating there. I literally did exactly what you said. Like exactly. I brought in before I left home in Sacramento. I packed my backpack with a bunch of Cliff Bars, a bunch of beef jerky. I had Advil with me because I knew I would probably be in some pain. Like I 100% was never planning on buying a burger or a slice of pizza or anything. So when people were complaining about that, I'm kind of like, well, what did you think was going to be? Like, of course it's going to be expensive and there's going to be long lines because there's a bunch of guys there who like to eat. I think I bought a couple of a beer on Wednesday and a beer on Thursday. And that was pretty much the extent of what I bought there. So,
yeah, there was a lot of beer sales. Like there was a couple of people, Greg, I didn't know them, but I saw them with a lot of beer in their hands consistently. I'm like, are you here at the bar? Or are you here for some sports cards? I really started to question. I'm half kidding. And I'm also half serious. You brought up something I really kind of like it. I've never heard anyone else say it. I want to ask you about that. But before I do, I want to tell you probably the stuff you've heard and the stuff I've heard, right? Because of how big the hobby's got and how big the nationals got, right? I've heard talk of having 2 nationals a year rather than 1. I'm not speaking for myself, and then I'll get your 2 cents. I don't want to see 2 nationals. I think it will lose some of the luster if you have 2. There's 1 Super Bowl a year. There's 1 World Series a year. Even if it's busy because there's only 1, I really only want it to be 1 national. But what you said, a light bulb went off, and I love the idea. I'd signed that petition yesterday. Maybe make the national 8, 9, 10 days, like you said. That doesn't mean you have to go for all 10 days. People, obviously, dealers would. But that's their livelihood and their business, so that's a whole different animal. But maybe I would pick 4 or 5 days. I'm going these 4 or 5 days. Someone else would pick a different, maybe potentially 4 or 5 days, and maybe you'd have more people, but it wouldn't seem like that because they would be there at different times. I've never heard that before. When listening to you say that, I'm like that. I love that. I think
let me go even further with that. Like, it falls on my birthday every year, and it has for 25 years. When my dad got so into the hobby that he was going to, when I was in college, he was going to the National in Atlantic City and Cleveland and LA and Chicago without me. And he would call me each night and tell me how the show went, and we'd talk about it. And he would always say, "Are you sure it's okay that I miss your birthday this year?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's fine. I'm an adult. It's all good." And my buddy Mookie, Mookie, we sat and talked in the aisle. Mookie's anniversary is during the National. And he's like, "Man, this is like my one chance, my one, opportunity to do this." See, the reason that 2 nationals don't work is the thing about the National is it's not just about the cards. The cards are on eBay every night. They're on REA. They're on Golden. It's a reunion with all of your friends who share the hobby. And so if you do 2, it's like having a high school reunion and going, okay, well, this weekend it's A through M, and then the next weekend it's N through Z. And you're like, but half the people are over there. But if you do it over 8-9 days, you can coordinate with your core circle and say, what days are you going? Hey, can we do it these days? And you can make sure that there's overlap, that you get to see your key guys. But if you have this thing that's two different ones, to me, it's not the same thing. It would absolutely lose the luster, and I would be way less likely to attend because I would only be going to the one that half of my pals were going to.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're both waving the same pennant here, Greg. I don't want to see two. I love your idea of just making it longer. It doesn't mean you don't have to go. You buy passes, you buy tickets for the days you want to go. And they can even gauge with those ticket sales, like what days might be more people there than another one, let's say. I think there'll be more people if they did. No, someone will say, well, less people will go because they can't go for the whole time. We don't have to go for the whole time. That's the beauty of it.
Well, and
it's not like if you can't. Yeah, go ahead.
They're turning away dealers, right? They're turning away dealers, and all the modern collectors were mad this year because a lot of the dealers that get turned away are the newer dealers, and the newer dealers are a lot of the modern dealers. And so a lot of collectors were mad that it seemed like there was more vintage, and that's because they turned away dealers. What if they had it where it was, 8-9 days, or even call it 10 days, and the first 5 days be the vintage days, and the next 5 days be the modern days? And then you can have the dealers that do both do all 10. Or you could have more booths for the first 5. And people say, oh, but the setup wouldn't work because people have to load in and load out. You could have some sort of flex day in the middle, or you could do something where you just make it more accessible so that everyone can go at the time that they want. And I mean, it seems too obvious. It's like, you go to Disneyland, and in the summertime, it's open till midnight because it's jammed in the summertime. And during the holidays, it's open till midnight. But if you go there in October, it closes at like 8:00 because it's not jammed. You don't need more hours to get through the park because there are less people. So it seems like it's just a release valve that you could open and shut and find the sweet spot of it. And it just makes too much sense to me.
It does. I'm on board. I'm right behind you when we march to the Capitol. No, it makes sense. And I definitely don't want to see two. Like you, I think you hit the nail on the head. The bloom comes off the rose a little bit. I think what winds up happening is both shows, if they ever went to two now, both shows actually get watered down in that process. I'd rather have one big one, even if some people complain about something or other. It is what it is. Then you don't have to go, right? We make a choice to go. Like you said, you go to an NFL game, a 49, like, hey, I'm going to be in the parking lot probably an hour to 2 hours after the game trying to get out. Like I kind of sign up for this. When I go, I'm a Steelers fan. So when I go to, it's Acrisure Stadium, and I still say Heinz Field. When I go to the stadium, I know it's going to be probably an hour before I get on the main highway and get rolling again. That's just par for the course. So
my daughter went to a Giants game yesterday with my brother, and the
preseason, game, no less.
Well, no, the Giants, baseball Giants, San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
But when the game started at 1, and the game ended at like 4, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, they'll probably get home at about 8 because they're going to stop and eat. Yeah. It's going to be a drive, and it's going to be a lot of traffic. I mean, it's not a surprise.
Yeah. And listen, if you do this long enough, it shouldn't be. You should know. The other thing, I'm going to stick up for the West Coast here. I know you said you're fine if you don't get it, but you like Chicago. I'm a fairness guy. I'm an East Coast guy. We're kind of spoiled. I don't know if we'll get it in Atlantic City again. Cleveland's drivable. Chicago's not, but it's at least midpoint, if you will. I think you should have a West Coast National, whether that's in the form of Seattle, Northwest, Anaheim, San Francisco, Las Vegas you mentioned. But I think in fairness to collectors, right, that why should you guys have to travel the furthest every year? Maybe not, I'll say this, maybe not have it in an exact rotation where it's West Coast, Midwest, and then East, like exactly like that. But I think there should be a West Coast National for the folks and collectors and hobbyists out that way. If I lived there, I'd want that. You know.
Well, obviously, part of me would like it just because of the ease and accessibility, and we really only have one big show on the West Coast now, which is the Burbank show, and
Yeah.
even that's a 7-hour drive for me because it's not actually in Burbank; it's an hour south of Burbank. But when I think about it, again, for me, I just want to compromise. It's like when you're setting the time for dinner on Thanksgiving with the whole family and you're trying to find a time that works for everyone. I just want to find a place that works for everyone so that everybody can attend and be happy. And if we're not doing it where everyone can attend and be happy, if we did it in LA, it would be better for me. But a lot of my East Coast buddies probably wouldn't be able to make it. And so I would rather travel to Denver, which is, west-ish. And then it's a little bit further from them, but it's a little bit, from me, but it's a hub in the middle where we can all kind of get to it. Denver, I don't know what they have as far as facilities, but they've got a huge airport and it's kind of close to everything. It's a 3-hour flight for everyone. And that one is a place I wish that they would consider, but they must not have a convention center that can handle it. Otherwise, it just seems too obvious to me.
Yeah, no, I'm there's, it's, I guess it's easy to say, hey, have it here, have it there. There's more. I've had Ray on the show. You got hotel issues and a lot of other logistics. We can make this a mobster show and talk about the union. I'm not going to.
That's the union is part of it, though. It's part of the deal.
Yeah. So, but I'd like, and I would get there. It might cost me a few extra shekels. But I'd come to Cal. I've never been to California, so it's a good reason for the first time ever. But in fair, I try to be fair to everyone, right? It's easy for me to say, hey, be in Atlantic City every year, I can drive. Be in Cleveland every year, I can drive. Be in New York City, it's my hometown, I can drive. But I try to think of the big picture, and like I'd like to see it. How often I don't know. It's not for me to say, but I think it's fair. There's plenty. I hear, well, the bulk of collectors are on the East Coast. Like, what are we doing? Weighing people? Maybe the heavier people are on the East Coast, but I think there's millions of people on both coasts who are in the hobby. So, in fairness, with that being said, like I'm not opposed. I'd love to see it on the West Coast. Might cost a little bit more for me, but what are you going to do? That's life, right? So,
well, and it
got
has
a choice,
been.
right? Go or you can't go. Like, that's it.
It has
been.
been.
You're right.
It's been in LA. Anaheim's got a big convention center. That's where one of the Burbank shows is. I think it's the August one is in Anaheim, right across the street from Disneyland. Obviously, has the airports and the hotels, and San Francisco's hosted it. It's been a long time, but so they have had it. But my understanding is now they pull the dealers, and the dealers are the ones that decide the every other year. And so they're going to probably pick what's going to be most convenient for them. But it is what it is.
All right. Staying along those lines, this was a question. I don't write a ton of stuff down. I'm more of a conversationalist, but it's a good segue. We're seeing, you're aware of this. We're seeing a lot more shows pop up in smaller towns and smaller venues that have never even had a card show before. And while I support that, I think it's great that those communities can get those shows. We're also seeing a lot more regional, a lot more bigger city shows where there's just a plethora of shows. And I'm a dealer too. Like, I set up at shows and I'm a consumer. I go to shows, so I wear both of those hats. I don't want to say fear. That might be too strong a word. But one of my concerns is, like, we might get to a saturation point, Greg, where we have too many shows. And again, talking about bloom coming off the rose, right? Is sometimes too much of a good thing is a bad thing. What are your thoughts on maybe, an oversaturation of shows?
Well, I think that, in the late 80s, early 90s, there were card shops popping up all over the place. I mentioned the first one that I was going to is called Cards and Cards. Well, a few months later, a shop opened across the street from them called the Boys of Summer. And then there's a card shop literally a quarter of a mile down the road called Timeout Sports Cards. and there was absolutely an oversaturation. But I also believe I'm kind of an economist by heart. I love economics. I took economics electives in college because I like it so much. I believe in the free market, and the free market will find the sweet spot. And if too many shows pop up, what will happen is they'll cannibalize each other and they won't make money. And then those shows will go away, and they'll pop up it'll find the sweet spot. It'll find the equilibrium of what the right amount is. And I think that, right now there are probably some people that are trying to capitalize and maybe put on a few too many shows in some areas. Some people are saying, what are you talking about? I can't find a show anywhere. But a lot of places it's getting a little carried away, and it'll find the sweet spot. And so I kind of don't really overthink that and just say, whatever the right amount is where we'll land. And right now, there are probably some people that are doing some shows promoting and not doing super well, and others are doing great, and it'll work itself out.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And I you convinced me, right? The strongest will, like the saying, what strongest will survive. I guess from a sentimental point, I'm trying to save everybody. But you know how that goes. You can't.
Here's the other thing I'll throw out there too, though, is competition I also believe is good. And so if there are a lot of shows popping up, it forces each show to be better. It forces the prices down for the entrance. Or if it's too much, people will say, I'll just wait for the one next weekend. It forces them to really advertise to the good dealers and get the good stuff in the room, and a facility that's nice, not an old gym with no AC and bad tables. And so I think that the competition is good for us as collectors. So I don't think I'm going to be a person that's going to complain about too many shows, because the competition is going to make the shows that do make it out on the other end better shows, which is good for us as collectors.
Yeah, you convinced me. I'm not as worried. Like you said, it'll all shake out in the end, one way or the other. We talk going back to Nashville. I also too like the layout. You had if you had no interest in breaking, you could avoid that area almost altogether. If you didn't want to deal with the corporate presence, you can avoid that as well. I hope that is something the new powers that be kind of keep that layout in Chicago. I got a feeling they're gonna. We'll see how that goes. All right, awesome getting to have Greg on the show for the first time, chopping up some hobby with him. And here's the best part. Hope you enjoyed it, but the best part is we're not done. That was part 1. Part 2 will be next week. So we got to cover a lot of ground. One of my longer interviews since I start doing 2-part episodes, and just had a blast talking to him. We weren't watching time, and so we're going to put this, the rest of it, come back next Friday and catch it in its conclusion. So thanks to Greg, thanks to you. We're going to go to our Hobbies the People announcer of the week, some closing thoughts, and wrap up this week's episode.
Time for our Hobby is the People announcer of the week.
This is Zach Byrne, one of many hobbyists who returned during COVID. Thanks to John for steering me in the right direction. And remember, the hobby is the people.
If you'd like to be the Hobby is the People announcer of the week, do a WAV or MP3 file and send it to sportscardnationpc@gmail.com.
That's a wrap for this week. Huge thanks to you, the listeners out there, because without you, there is no us. If you like the show, we truly appreciate positive reviews. Big ups to our great guests who drive the show and our awesome sponsors who make it all possible. Sports Card Nation will be back next week, but don't forget to catch either Hobby Quick Hits or Card Mentions coming up on Monday. I'll leave you with this. How do we change the world? One random act of kindness at a time. Remember, the hobby is the people.
Iron Sports Cards is your #1 source for all your PSA and other grading submissions. Their elite status improves turnaround times. Heck, they even provide the card savers. Their chat rooms provide updates on all your submissions. They also offer wax options and single cards to cover all the bases. Check them out on Facebook at Iron Sports Cards Group or on the web at ironsportscards.com, or even give them a call at 1-877-IRON-PSA. Rob's got you covered.
For nearly 50 years, Sports Collectors Digest has been the voice of the hobby, bringing you comprehensive coverage of the sports collectible industry. From industry news, auction results, market analysis, and in-depth stories about collectors and their collections, Sports Collectors Digest has everything you need to know about the hobby. SCD is also your leading source for listings of sports collectible dealers, card shops, card shows, and the latest from the industry's top companies. To check out all the latest news or to subscribe to the hobby's oldest magazine, visit sportscollectorsdigest.com or call 1-800-829-5561.